We begin with the escalating attacks and counterattacks in Russia's war against Ukraine. Kremlin forces attempting to hit President Volodymyr Zelensky close to home as Ukraine ramps up strikes inside Russian territory. CNN's Nick Paton Walsh is on the ground for us in Ukraine. Nick, crews have been digging through the rubble after that deadly attack on President Zelensky's hometown.
Yeah, and the target's blatantly civilian, a technical college, but most severely an apartment block where we appear to have lost 6 lives so far, including a 10-year-old girl and a startling number of injured. Over 70, as you say, rescue crews continue to look through the rubble here. And just in the last hours, Wolf, hearing that the town of Kherson has indeed also been hit in civilian areas, with local officials talking about 4 dead and 20 injured. This civilian toll, a repeated sign of Russia's, I think, frustration, savagery in the face of what appears to be its slow losses on the southern front line. Here's what we saw there today.
The fight so fierce and victory so bitter, there is little left of Staromayorsky to defend it from. No cover for troops, no structures, just the dust of a tiny 4-road village, the first gains of Ukraine's renewed full-throttle counter-offensive. So small but symbolic, Russia even claimed Monday, with constant shelling, it had pushed Ukraine out of it again. Something these men, fresh back from that fight, would scoff at. Krivbas, his call sign, fought all the 10 days of the assault until the Russians finally fled. Here he is as shells rain around in the initial advance. When you assault under enemy shelling, he says, you have nowhere to hide. That's the hardest part. They've since tried to assault again twice with small groups. And he fought for here too, Neskuchny, the town before it, where the Russians hid 200 troops in the basements, not even leaving for the toilet, so Ukraine attacked with a smaller force. He takes us to where the Russians made their final stand, the school hall and its corridors. There is no love, says the wall. They seem to relish the nothing they brought and left no clues as to why they fought.
One of the hard things for the Ukrainians to understand is quite why the Russians are fighting so hard for here, Neskuchny, and the more recent victory of Staromayorsky down the road. Is it that these are their last lines of defense? Well, no. They think there's far more fighting to be done.
I hope that when we get through their last line of defense, he says, then they start to run. For now, they still feel there is something behind them. Yeah, we feel support, but we are very, very tired. There is so much more ahead to come. Ukraine may have put in its reserves now to the fight, but they face the same Russian brutality. Their tactics haven't changed, he says. They put the Storm Z convicts in front with no communications or information. They stand till the death. I don't understand their motivation or what they're fighting for. Riva carries a new Russian AK-12 as a trophy as he describes the gas they used on him. There was chaotic shooting, he says, to find out where we were. Then the gas. You don't feel it. It moves slow along the ground. I was packing my rucksack when I felt burning on my throat and nose. One mine sapper, call sign Volt, is busy telling me how the Russians have started booby-trapping mines, putting a grenade under an anti-tank mine, when he's interrupted. Almost endless, the noise of outgoing fire. They are moving, but just not sure how much longer for.
It's important to note that while there are indications, particularly from US officials, that we're into a new phase of Ukraine's counteroffensive where reserve forces are being sent to the front line, sometimes, though, still, when you talk to men like you heard there, Krivbas, who've been fighting for the past months, regardless of the change in the overall tempo, they feel exhausted, they feel progress. But that sapper you heard, the D minor at the end of that report, they move forwards sometimes at 100 metres per day. That's how slow the work is demining. That's how perilous the ground they're fighting for is, Wolf.
Nick Paton Walsh in Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine for us. Nick, stay safe. We'll stay in touch with you. Thank you very much. Now let's get more on how Russia is lashing out as Ukrainian forces strike in Vladimir Putin's backyard. Look at this drone attack in Moscow and listen to the fear it unleashed. Listen. CNN's Nic Robertson is following all of these dramatic developments for us. Nick, Ukraine is now repeatedly striking targets inside Moscow as Zelensky says the war is, quote, returning to Russia. What's behind this new strategy?
You know, perhaps it's an effort here by the Ukrainians to puncture the propaganda of President Putin, who continues to say, look, the war in Ukraine is going our way. He calls it a special military operation. Everything's on track. We're doing it all right. Even when his own national security, number two in the national security, Dmitry Medvedev, the former prime minister, former president, is saying, well, if Ukraine does make advances with its counteroffensives, just as Nick was reporting there, then perhaps Russia will have to use its nuclear weapons. So, you know, on the one hand, the Russian narrative is we're doing well. On the other hand is maybe we're not, and we'll have to up our attacks to nuclear attacks. There's no evidence, by the way, that that's actually happening. But on the ground in Moscow, most people there, all they get is the Putin propaganda. They think the war's going well. Well, here Ukraine is able to show them something else. Last weekend, there were also strikes in Moscow. A couple of weeks back, there were more strikes in Moscow as well. And we're also seeing in other places just over the border from Ukraine in Russia, vital military hubs, where Ukraine is also increasing its number of drone attacks there. Now, Russia's defense minister has said that they will respond, that they will double down back. The Kremlin is saying that this is all a sort of a desperate act by Ukraine to strike into Moscow. But it very clearly tries to puncture Putin's propaganda. Can it let all the air out? Well, no, because the Russians still control the narrative. But it does get that message to Russians. There is a cost for this war, and potentially the Ukrainians are going to put that price up.
Yes, indeed they are. Nic Robertson reporting for us. Thank you. Joining us now here in the Situation Room to discuss the war in Ukraine and more, the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby. John, thanks very much for joining us. How concerned are you right now about this escalation in attacks from Russia, including in Zelensky's hometown?
Yeah, this is very much of a piece of Mr. Putin's desperate efforts to really terrorize the Ukrainian people, to really bring the war home to them. I mean, he's not even making the pretense of going after military targets. And this has been going on for months. So we see this as yet more steps for him to try to really break the will of the Ukrainian people. And you would have thought by now he would have long ago learned that's just not going to happen.
What's the U.S. position on Ukraine launching these attacks against various targets right in downtown Moscow?
Well, again, we've seen this in the past before. I just want to make it very clear that we are neither encouraging nor are we enabling attacks inside Russia.
Are you opposing those attacks?
We are neither encouraging nor enabling them. We've had conversations with the Ukrainians about our concerns about attacks inside Russia. They can speak to their targeting and what they're doing.
What is the U.S. position?
Our position is we want to focus on the war inside Ukraine. We want to make sure that they have everything they need to succeed in this counteroffensive, the kind of counteroffensive fighting that, you know, Nick was just reporting on.
But is the U.S. accepting what Ukraine is doing, launching these drone strikes, for example, at this huge building in Moscow?
It's not about accepting, Wolf. I mean, they have to make decisions about what they're going to target and where they're going to put their military capabilities. We are not encouraging attacks inside Russia, and we are certainly not enabling attacks inside Russia. We really want to focus on what's going on in Ukrainian territory, but the Ukrainians should be the ones to speak to whatever targeting they're doing outside their borders.
You heard Nick Paton Walsh's report. What's the U.S. assessment on how the Ukrainian counteroffensive is developing right now?
I actually think Nick did a great job really summarizing, even though he was in one little area. He really did summarize it well. They are moving slowly. And they'll be the first to tell you they're not moving as far or as fast as they would like to. But I think it's important to remember that when they're running into these defensive lines, Wolf, they're sometimes 3 deep, and they're protected by minefields. It's hard enough to go through a terrestrial minefield just on its own. And when you're being shot at and shelled, which they are every single day, it's really painstaking work. So they're making some progress. It's not as far as they'd like, but they are making progress. And we're going to keep at it. We're going to keep making sure that they have all the materials they need. You might have noticed in the last couple of packages that we sent, mine clearing equipment was right at the top of the list.